So, good morning, everyone. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of our participants joining us today for the very first session of the inaugural CLI Outma Innovation and Legal Tech Week 2021 live program. My name is Fiona Croswell and I'm the L&D Manager at Outma. This session is focusing on changing mindset, changing your legal world, and I would like to introduce Anu Briggs, Head of Capability Development and Change, and Jan Christie, Capability and Development Manager at Gilbert Tobin. Thank you, Anu and Jan.
Thank you very much, Fiona. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see our lovely presentation, and we'll kick off. So first of all, I would like to thank Outma and the Centre for Legal Innovation very much for giving us the absolute honour of kicking off this conference. We know just how important the work that both of those organisations does in this space, and we are thrilled to be part of that. Today's session around changing mindset, changing your legal world is one that is very close to both our hearts. Anu is going to be leading most of this session. The reason for that is that Anu has a particular interest in the area of mindset. She's done postgraduate work in the area of positive psychology. She has a number of qualifications in relation to tools such as DISC, LSI, and does a lot of executive coaching in the legal and elite athlete space. So looking at performance and looking at the way in which change happens is a very big part of the work that she does. So she is going to lead most of that. I'm going to chime in with some of the practical examples that I like to use around coaching and around building capability. So that's really the way in which we're going to take everyone through today's session. We are both, for our sins, former lawyers, and so we come from a perspective where we know what it's like to be in a law firm, to be practicing law in a law firm, but also to have stepped out of being a practicing lawyer and taking a role that sits beside that and really supports that development in some different way. That's a little bit of background for you. So what are we going to focus on today? What we're looking at is really understanding why it is that an awareness of our mindset and a development around mindset has become an absolutely critical legal capability. Over the years, we've watched what constitutes a lawyer and their capabilities change. We've watched it move from purely technical to a number of different skills, and Anu is going to take you through that journey. But a big part of that is really around mindset, and that's what we're going to focus on. We're going to give you an understanding of what it is mindset actually is and a little bit of the neurological background to how that works. In particular, what we're going to look at is different kinds of mindset and how that works for a lawyer, what works at what stage and when you might need to shift that. We're going to take you through some really practical steps to build awareness around your mindset and how you might shift that, and really look at the sorts of things that might get in the way of you changing your mindset in some way. So that's our trip today. I'm going to now hand over to Anu to take you through the main part of the session.
Thank you, Jan, and welcome everyone to today's session. We've got some theory and background for you. I know working with lawyers and elite athletes over the years that part can be very, very interesting because they like the complexity, but we're also going to take you through some activities which will get you thinking. And I thought that we would start today by just touching on, and we're not going to go in any detail around this, in terms of the evolution of lawyer capabilities. And really, the point of this slide is to look at the shift that has happened so quickly over the last few years in terms of lawyer capabilities and why that may be. So we all know there's been huge global mega trends in terms of the way we work. The lay of COVID and the pandemic has changed the way we're working literally in terms of our environment. Clients, whether you're working as a sole practitioner or in a law firm, or your stakeholders within an in-house environment, are looking for value creation from a legal team and department. And the technology advancements and use of technology has had huge growth. So as a result of that, there's been like this evolution of the legal role. And that could be a lawyer, a practitioner, or someone that supports an operational role. It could be someone who's in a hybrid role doing a combination. And what we've noticed is there's been a real shift from what many of you may have heard as the T-shaped lawyer, which is very much, if you look at the I part of the lawyer, is your technical skills, your legal analytical skills, etc. sorry, Jan, thank you, to the process improvement and efficiency skills. So many of you will be aware of things like design thinking, continuous improvement, change management principles, and that T-shaped lawyer is still very important today in terms of development. But what we've noticed with the shift in terms of lawyer models as well to many of you will have heard of O and D-shaped, is this idea that the technical legal skills and the technical skills on the tools are not enough in this changing legal landscape. And now it's about how do you understand yourself? How do you build relationships? How can you be adaptable? How can you have a mindset that embraces openness? And how can you be opportunistic? So what's required of lawyers in today's world is huge. And we know now that mindset is underpinning and playing a huge part in what's required of lawyers in today to be successful. So before I get onto the slide, I want to mention that having been coaching now for 12 years, when I was working with executives probably 5 or 6 years ago, while theoretically they understood the importance of mindset development, because we know now that our brain plasticity can change and develop, and there's a huge body of research around that. While in essence they thought it was important, it hasn't really been until we've seen these new models evolve that people are saying, okay, now I know mindset's important, let's work on it. But I still get asked the question, what is it and why is it important? So people kind of understand it fundamentally, but really want to understand what it is in detail, how it might apply to them as a lawyer and what they can do in relation to that. And that's very much what we're going to focus on today. So I put together this kind of definition around an innovative culture or working environment and what that might mean in a legal context. So I see it as an innovative working environment is one that enables flexible and creative thinking to come up with new ideas, and also the part of developing new and advanced products. And this talks to, if we go back to that capability model, the ability to think differently, but then the application and implementation in terms of product, service, and process improvement is also really important. And in the legal world, this is the active adoption of alternative practices and tools to improve the service we're providing our stakeholders or clients. And I've highlighted active because that's the most important part. And what I say to my clients is if mindset wasn't important and we had all of these tools and technologies to implement and new ways of working, we would turn up on Monday morning and everybody would be using them seamlessly. No one would have anything to say about it, and we would improve the way we work and deliver our service to clients. But the reality is it doesn't happen like that. And I'm sure you or you've heard someone else say, I am too busy to engage with this piece of technology or change the way I work, even though logically they know that by doing so would reduce, client cost, for example. So the idea is that we tend to resist this idea of changing the way we think or changing the way we work. And despite our efforts around trying new things, we tend to revert back to old habits. So if we have a new piece of technology or way of working, we may try it, and then we fall back. It's the same thing with New Year's resolutions. So we say, yes, I'm going to do this. We have good intention. We even shift our behavior for a while. But why is it that most people don't succeed with those resolutions? That is because they have not gone a layer deeper and considered their mindset and the way they're thinking about something. And so we talk about this idea that old habits die hard. And the one thing I want to highlight here is that most of us would tend to engage and walk around mindless. There's a Harvard professor called Ellen Langer who talks about the fact that human beings come from a mindless place 90% of the time. And that means we tend to work on autopilot. We tend to focus on what has worked for us over the years, what has given us success, what has been simple. But the reality is that that doesn't work in an ever-changing, fast-paced, volatile world. So what we want to understand is how do we naturally think and why? And when can we change this to adopt new ways of practice, working, and thinking? So we're going to get you to do something now. We're going to run a couple of very short primary mindset exercises. So we're going to show you 2 slides for 30 seconds each. And I'd like you to review the content of the slide, without overthinking, which I know is challenging for those lawyers practicing or not on the call today. But the idea is we're looking for instinctive responses. So when you look at the slide for 30 seconds, we're going to get you to pick from the list of words what you consider to be the top 3 traits and attributes that contribute to the success of a lawyer. Thank you for doing that. We'll come back to the answers around that. I can have a quick look. Some of those are interesting, so we'll come back to those in a moment. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So now I want you to take your lawyer hat off if you've had it on for the exercise, and I want you to just look at the 2 thought bubbles that are going to come up. Again, it's instinctive. And I want you to say, which one are you most drawn to? Once you have done that, if you could jot down on a piece of paper or just make a mental note of any thoughts that came into your mind when you did this particular exercise or saw this slide. So I'm going to come back to that in a moment. I've had a quick glance. I could see the polls slightly, and it is quite interesting. So I'll be able to talk you through that in a moment. What I want to focus on now is what mindset is and how it fits with what I refer to our map coding. So we tend to look at mindset without looking at what's influencing our mindset behind the scenes. And as I mentioned before, we know that brain plasticity plays an important part in that, in terms of creating new ways of thinking, but also new brain coding that influences that. So here's my famous iceberg, and you can see the behaviors and actions are on top of the water, which is what most of us would see day to day, all the things we try to change if we want to embrace different ways of working or new ways of thinking. But what we know is underneath there, we're heavily influenced by our mindset, which is our thinking lens. So it's the way we either automatically or choose to apply our brain structure coding, which sits behind it. I'm going to show you in a moment the structure of the brain and where this coding may sit, but I just want to give you a bit of an overview of what I refer to our maps of the world and our map coding. So our map coding is things that we have hardwired over the years. They are our map of the world or our perception of the truth. They're not necessarily the truth, they are our truth. And they have developed over the years. Some are biological and some are environmental. They are developed through influences like parents, families, school teachers, etc. And the interesting thing is we tend to group coding in different parts of our brain. And the largest part of our brain, which we'll have a look at in a moment, is what I refer to as heavily influencing our primary mindset. I'll give you an example of that. So beliefs and values that are true for me. Well, as I was growing up, my father said to me, never a lender or borrower be. So I've never had a credit card in the true sense of a credit card. I use a Visa debit card. And I never bought an investment property until I was well into my 30s, when I realized that I could challenge some of these beliefs by thinking quite differently. And so that was something that was ingrained in me. My mother used to say children should be seen and not heard. I think that was one I challenged slightly earlier in my life. But generally speaking, as I was growing up, I was quite quiet and reserved, which I know for Jan that would be difficult for her to imagine. And I used to sit back and wait and never speak until I was someone asked me to speak. So these were kind of my beliefs and values that I had. And for many of you, I am sure that you are smart, you are capable. I'm sure you'll do well on your exams. You're very clever, you're academic, you should be able to do this, is all in that map coding, because that's been reinforced and influenced through your journey as a lawyer. So we've got all these values and beliefs and these traits that have helped us become successful. And that's the exercise I got you to do a short while ago, and we'll have a look at that. We also have coding that keeps things simple for us. So as human beings, simplicity is key. So I'm not sure if you've ever tested this, but if you go home tonight, when you brush your teeth, see which side of your mouth you put your toothbrush in, how long you brush your teeth for, and whether you move from right to left and back again, or vice versa, because it's an ingrained thing we do. And that's because we like to keep things basic and simple, and it works for us. It's why we choose the same lunch again. It's often why we hit the snooze button 7 or 8 times for one person and once or twice or not at all. So we ingrain these processes that are really simple and keep us safe. And our mindset will be influenced by those processes that have worked for us. And lastly, we code things based on safety. And this is really important because primarily that is our main purpose as a human being, is to survive. And safety coding will trump everything else. So if we feel uncomfortable, if we think we're going to be attacked by the saber-toothed tiger, or in most people's case, that will be a stakeholder or a client, we will avoid those interactions. We are the only creatures on the earth that can think about past events or future events and create the same physical feeling of unsafety when we're not even experiencing it. And we can change that based on the environment we're in and when something isn't even life-threatening. So if you've had an interaction with a person that has made you feel uncomfortable, you are more likely to avoid that and have a mindset around avoiding that based on that coding, unless you create what I will talk about later, which is mindset balance. So I did a course recently, Brain Academy, neuroscientist called Gregory Kerman, and I really liked the way he broke down sort of brain coding and thinking into brain structures. So I thought I would show you this, and I'll refer to it when we talk about developing mindset. So you can see down the bottom, we've got what we call our safety centers of the brain, the red reptilian structure and the paleolimbic structure, which is the orange structure just slightly above it. The red structure is all about our individual safety, and when we don't feel safe, and I gave the example of having an interaction that didn't go as well, and therefore we feel the physical symptoms and we either want to run, freeze, or fight back. And that will tend to be our response in that situation. So that's our reptilian structure. And our mindset around things will be heavily, heavily influenced by the safety center. So unless we focus on or change our thinking and coding and move some of that from this reptilian structure into our other structures of our brain, or engage our logical part, which is our prefrontal cortex, we will continue to operate from there quite simply and basically because it keeps us safe. The paleolimbic structure is more about how we feel in a group positioning. So if you're in a team meeting and you're someone that likes to display being confident or trusting others and you're unable to do that, and the reverse applies, so I may not trust people naturally or I'm quite reserved, where it threatens our positioning in the group, we will come from a place of safety. So the coding I spoke about in terms of my mum saying children should be seen and not heard was reiterated through my group structure where I didn't talk in a room. And if I was asked to talk, it would trigger this limbic system and I would feel very, very uncomfortable, and it would influence the fact that I absolutely hated group settings as a child. I played the piano quietly, I swam, I didn't enjoy team sports until I was older, because this idea was that for me, my mindset was heavily influenced by my group positioning. The neolimbic structure is that big yellow part of our brain, and the great news is we can expand that. We know now that this can be expanded, and this is where all our coding around values and beliefs and personality comes from. We have a primary personality, and then we have a secondary personality, which has been developed through conditioning and reward and punishment over the years. And it's where we put all those beautiful automated processes. It's also where bias will sit in terms of creating assumptions around things to make our life as easy as possible. So you can see a large part of the brain is taken up by allowing us to work on autopilot most of the time and having a mindset that reflects that. So as Ellen would say, that's where our 90% of our coding would sit, because our mindset will reflect that. And then we look at that prefrontal cortex, which is where we do all that lovely logical reasoning and creative thinking. And this is what separates human beings, because animals like dolphins and monkeys have this area of the brain, but it is tiny in comparison to the human brain. And what we don't do as humans generally is engage this part of the brain enough. And when we do engage this part of the brain, it allows us to think differently to what, in terms of how we usually think. It allows us to look at different perspectives. It allows us to take new information in, and it allows us to expand the neolimbic structure and take us out of amygdala hijack, which happens in this red and orange area, which I spoke about. So hopefully now you can see where the coding that I've spoken about on the iceberg influences our thinking lens, which then drives our actions and behaviours. So I want to talk about two very well-known mindsets. These have expanded over the years. There are a number of authors like Simon Sinek, who's written a book on infinite mindset, but Carol Dweck is really known as the kind of leader in the space of mindset. And she started to do some work years ago with school children, and it came from a fascination of school children and how they reacted to being given feedback. And as I talk through this, I want you to imagine how you feel when you receive feedback. Is it something you love and you think, wow, I can get better? Or is it something you dread, don't look forward to, or hate and hate giving other people for the same reason? So as we're talking through this, think about your mindset around things. So Carol Dweck did this research, and what she determined was that primarily people have a primary mindset that is either fixed or growth. Okay, so those that had a fixed mindset generally believed that they should be able to do things, that they had a fixed talent or fixed expertise in something, and it was really hard to change that. And if you had a growth mindset, you were someone who didn't focus necessarily on the output or the talent or the intelligence not growing, but really had an innate belief that you could grow your mindset. You could grow your talent, you can grow your intelligence. And as you can see, we've kind of put it into a bit of a table so you can see how it relates to different things like desires, skills, and effort. And as I was writing some of this, I've used some of my experiences here. So I was really uncomfortable with setbacks a few years ago, and would really often say to myself, I know what I'm doing. This isn't my fault. This is someone else's. This isn't down to me. This is what someone else has done. Or I would find that, you know, with other people, I would think it must come naturally to her and they were born like that. But for me, it's a different story. So we've put these together for you to see the difference between the two types of mindsets. Okay, let's go to our poll, Jan. Can we see the results? So it's really interesting. We've got reflective and open to change. Analytical always comes up really, really high. Okay, so really we've got 1, 2, 3. Lovely, thank you so much. I'm gonna get you to share. So that's really interesting, and I'll explain why. So we have done some research at G&T with our clients internally, and I've added my coaching client research in relation to this. And what we've usually found, and I must say the research stopped 6 months ago, so any of this data is only relevant from midpoint in 2020, which may change things given the current environment, that out of the 223 lawyers I took the data from, the top 3 lawyer attributes and traits at that time that made lawyers successful, or that was what others thought, was critical, analytical, and skeptical. And the bottom 3 traits were vulnerable, open to change, and compassionate. And I can see from the poll that we've got open to change and reflective there, which is great to see because they are more aligned to this idea of an open mindset around change. But one thing that comes up a lot is this idea of being analytical or skeptical as a lawyer. And we all know that as a lawyer, they are traits which make us successful. So we need to put ourselves in the position of the other party. We need to understand what may or may not go wrong. We need to analyze information, data, etc. And we need to have the kind of mindset which might oppose that Carol Dweck talked about in terms of a growth mindset. Okay, Jan, let's have a look at. Here we go. So do we know what came up in the chat here? Was it blue or green?
No, I think people mulled that one over themselves.
Okay. So what I'll do is, I can see there's lots of different ones. There's a mixture of blue and green coming in.
There is a mixture.
So I'll give you the results, and I'll say why it doesn't, to some extent, it doesn't really matter in terms of the poll. But I've done this again with 220 practitioners, lawyers, both in-house and private practice. And what our results showed us is that 82.5% chose blue instinctively. But the most interesting part of this was that 27.5% of the research showed that people chose blue because chose green rather than blue because they thought that was the right answer, not how they really felt. And so that's why I asked you to jot down your thoughts when you were doing it, because there's a difference between thinking we have a certain mindset and then believing something else as well, or it actually being the case. And so what I found was that most lawyers had this kind of mindset that was fairly self-critical, that perhaps they liked doing another skill. It was leaning towards a base level of being a fixed mindset. But the point with this exercise is that it doesn't really matter. What matters is that we have an awareness, a real awareness of where our instinctive mindset goes, okay? I did a coaching course to become accredited 8 years ago. And in the coaching course, I was asked to do some interactions with someone and ask some questions, and was told it was really important to ask, to see the potential in the other person and to ask inquisitive and curious questions to draw out the information. And my response was, why would I need to do that when I know the answer? Okay, so why would I see potential in someone else, and why would I get them to solve their own problems when I've got the answer for them? And it was a light bulb moment in my career where I realized that I generally had a fairly fixed mindset in terms of base mindset. Yes, I would sometimes bring an open mindset to the table, but overall, this idea along the way that I should be able to do something. I was fairly perfectionistic. I didn't like setbacks, and I really liked the idea of outputs being reinforced, like grades or feedback, meant that I tended to position myself instinctively at a fixed mindset and had the coding that supported that. And so with this exercise, it's just to give you an idea of where you naturally might sit. Even if you have a growth mindset, you need to maintain it. So all the work that I'm going to do with you and Jan's going to do with you in this session is helpful and useful wherever you sit on the mindset spectrum. Thank you, Jan. So let's have a look at the research around when do we want to think like a lawyer. And I'll say think like a lawyer on an assumption that the attributes and traits that people have ingrained in their maps of the world when they are a legal practitioner, and perhaps let's caveat that with saying, in a world that wasn't as volatile and uncertain as it's been in the last 12 months, and based on our research, when do we actually want to bring that fixed mindset? When is it beneficial and when is it not beneficial? And the research supports this. So it hasn't been done in relation to lawyers, but it has been done in relation to academics. It was done with pre-med students. So Grant and Dweck from Columbia University did some research around, when do the fixed mindset group give us a stronger performance, a better performance and output. And what they found was that where there's high levels of confidence in their ability to do something, so perhaps they've had their grade reinforced, they've received A's along the way, and they're coming in to do a similar exam, their technical craft isn't required to change, and they're required to sit the exam again, and they come in with these high levels of confidence. What they found was that the fixed mindset group got higher grades, better results than those that were in the growth mindset group. Okay, so what that showed us is that where we're doing something really well and getting reinforced from our stakeholders that we're doing a great job, it could be how we draft legal advice, for example, or how we negotiate, that performance doesn't drop. And actually some of those traits that we've talked about, the analytical, the skepticism, pessimistic attitude, etc., are beneficial because we want to bring our A game, and we know we can. The problem was that when things changed, like the way in which they needed to learn information or the way they did the exam, confidence dropped in the fixed mindset group and grades dropped, and then people dropped out of the course. So it was quite significant in terms of what happened to performance over time when it wasn't linear, what was required of people. And what they found was the growth mindset group had a positive impact on performance over time. Their focus was not on the grade, it was focused on the learning process and what they needed to improve. And they were motivated not by the end grade, but how well they learned and how much improvement they could have over time. So in knowing this, it's important to understand where our base level is and when we want to bring that same mindset in terms of delivery of legal work, and when we need to do something differently and actually think about developing our mindset to be more flexible in that situation. And Lisa Blackwell proved that anyone can build a growth mindset, and when they do, there's a positive correlation between mindset and successful change outcomes. So remember, the focus here is change. If we don't need to change something and we're delivering something which is a top line product or service, we can keep bringing that same perfectionistic mindset. But if we want to change, we need to have a more flexible way of thinking. And we can do this by growing this growth mindset. She did it using mantras. So she got one group to say, talent and intelligence is fixed and you can't change it. And the other group to say, I can build my talent and success over time. I just need to put in a different type of effort. And she found that that group could change from having a very fixed mindset instinctively to a growth mindset. So at G&T, we've developed what I call the mindset spectrum. And it's really important to identify where you sit on that. The 2 exercises we've done are very, very, very instinctive, basic exercises. And we wanted to show you them to show the research we've done in this area. I've got another activity to show you in a minute that we will send to you as well that you can do at home, but I'll take you through the answers and how that can give you an indication of your primary mindset. But this mindset spectrum is flexible. You could sometimes be fixed and sometimes switch to transformational. You could be somewhere between fixed and growth. The analogy I use for it, which might help you see where you sit when you think about things, is a fixed mindset is one that is frightened to do new things and will often default to what they're good at. So for example, if I'm not a musician and I don't play the piano, if I have a fixed mindset, I'll say I'm not musical, so there's no point, or I can't learn to play the piano, or I don't want to. A growth mindset would say, yeah, I think I could. If I practiced and tried it several times, then I could learn to play the piano. And a transformational mindset is, I can absolutely learn to play the piano, and not only learn to play the piano, but I believe I can write music, and I can do that through changing the way I think, absorbing new information, looking at things from different perspectives, reflecting, seeking feedback. So it's this idea that you create a broader coding in that brain and a belief system that sits behind that to say, I can absolutely do it. So here's the activity I've pulled together. How are we looking for time, Jan? Can people have a go at jotting some of this stuff down? Or
I think it would be useful, just quickly.
So if you want to take a few minutes, you can jot down your answers to these questions. And then what we may do is I'll come back and talk you through the answers in terms of the awareness exercise, and we'll move forward from there. Okay, so I think, there's a deeper way of going into this is you put reasons behind things and we sort of drill down it, particularly in the coaching context. But generally speaking, those people who think IQ can be increased, that you need to do things through effort, those that are opportunistic, who are optimistic. So if we go back to those sort of O-shaped capabilities, tend to lean towards a primary mindset that sits on the growth and transformational end, okay? Accepting mistakes, etc. And those that think that they're pretty happy with the status quo and they readily they won't accept past events, they tend to get stuck in the past or the future and can't be in the present, again, tend to lean towards a fixed mindset. It's helpful from the perspective of the type of work and the amount of work you need to do around your mindset to understand your base level, okay? And I will challenge you to put this into practice. So when you're back at work or you're going through your day, is that still true? So do you find that you accept your mistakes readily? It's okay to see a question and answer, yes, I do, but do you? And how do you feel about that? Does it conjure up some feelings of feeling uncomfortable? So test your answers against day in, day out. But the reality is we're still going to show you how to hack your mindset to change it and also develop it so that you can bring those beautiful lawyer traits that help you be a successful practitioner, but also one who can evolve with the legal landscape as it evolves. So here's back to my little brain structure and how we do this hacking and developing of mindset. Most people will be aware of how to hack the mindset, and examples of hacking mindset that you might be familiar with are, gratitude, reframing what you say, in the moment, asking yourself questions. That's all hacking mindset. And what that does is it intercepts the neo-limbic system, which is your yellow system. It engages your prefrontal cortex, the blue one, to think more logically. And then it, in the moment, changes how you think and feel and stops the safety part of your brain taking over. And a lot of us will be familiar with that. Here are examples of that right now. So you label your mindset voice. So with no judgment, I feel uneasy. I really just don't like presenting. I mean, that's the first step. Then it's about identifying you have a choice. This is what engages your prefrontal cortex, and the reframing of the code right there. It's better to be clear and kind when we're giving feedback. Stops you in the moment to think differently and apply then different action. The challenge is if we just do mindset hacks over time, we're not going to create new coding in the yellow part of the brain so we can act unconsciously. So we're going to revert back to the old ways of thinking. It's why we need to do deeper input work over time. So I'm going to hand to Jan fairly shortly, but this is a great book if anyone wants to read something called Wired to Create. And it talks about this idea that if we want to build creativity, whether it's in the way we think or behave, we need to explore not just our inner world, but our outer world as well. In terms of that, if we're wanting to build a transformational mindset, if we went back to the diagram with the brain and building a transformational mindset unconsciously, what we need to do is spend some time reflecting, inputting new information, and doing this on a regular basis. So David Eagleman, who wrote a book called Live Wired, which is fantastic, says we're not what we eat, we are what we digest. And that is so important. We can put things in sporadically and it won't get a result. We put things in consistently and we'll get a result. And what we need to do when we reflect is we then need to create some relevance and desire to change. And Jan's going to talk about this in terms of when we're setting goals or we want to make and create change, we should work to our strengths or what we're good at or want to be good at. The other thing is we work towards something we want to receive a reward for. Okay, so the idea is we input new data, we reflect, we learn, we do it regularly through repetition, then we create desire and relevance. And when we do that, we can build a really flexible transformational mindset. And we can, on that spectrum I talked about, the fixed and transformational, we can apply particular coding and particular mindsets in the moment regularly and unconsciously, which is really the end goal. So I built these buckets over the last sort of 3 or 4 years through client work. And what I found was that the clients that engage in specific reflection activity, so that new input going in these core areas, developed a transformational mind more effectively, and we saw results faster. So self-development is your willingness to understand and develop self. And there are certain questions you can ask yourself in relation to self-development. You can make it general and regular and specific to a work or personal situation, which will provide context. Connection, which is your willingness to build and connect trust with others. And motivational is critical because remember I said with a fixed mindset, we tend to love the idea of getting great grades, good feedback, promotion, recognition. And so the shift for motivational is how do I shift from being predominantly extrinsically motivated to intrinsically motivated. And the focus of clients when they did a lot of work with this bucket was really amazing. And the shift in terms of mindset was very fast. Jan. Okay, before I hand to Jan, I've given a lot of information and I appreciate that. We will have time for questions at the end, or we're very happy to answer questions post the session. I'm not going to go through this. This is for you to have a quick look at before I give it to Jan. But it's a summary of what we've looked at so far and how it fits together. And on that note, Jan, I'm handing to you.
All right, thanks, Anu. Okay, so that is an enormous amount of information to take in. What I'm going to do in the next little while is give you a couple of tools that will help you start to really work out where you sit with this, how you're going to practically put into effect some techniques that are going to help you with mindset shift. So we're going to do a few different things. I'm going to get you to actually use a pen or some electronic instrument to write things down and really engage with your own mindset and shifting it over the next little while. So what we're going to start with is Anu's 3 buckets. What you can see on the screen now are some of those questions that she referred to. So under each of those headings, some of the questions you might ask yourself and might think about in relation to your your progress, your willingness under each of those headings. What I'm going to ask you to do for the next 2 minutes is to take one or two of those questions under one of those headings and really drill down into it. I don't want you to just think about it and flit on to the next one. Really think about, really analyze what those questions mean for you. So pick one or two. We're going to come back to why I'm asking you to do this in a moment, and really focus in on it for 2 minutes. And I'm going to actually put a stopwatch on this, and your 2 minutes starts now. Now, for some of you, that 2 minutes was wonderful. You were just starting to get into the process. In fact, you're a bit annoyed that I've stopped you because you were really starting to get the juices flowing and ideas going. And for others of you, and I suspect more of you, that was excruciating. 2 minutes of silence just doesn't work. So you might have checked your phone, probably checked an email or two. After 30 seconds, you were thinking, surely the 2 minutes is up. So why did we do that? As Anu has been saying all the way through this, mindset is very much focused on an understanding of that thinking process, of not just skipping over the surface, but really drilling into it and reflecting. For some people, that reflection comes quite easily. In fact, it's a strength of theirs, and I'm going to come to that in a moment. But for others, it's not. You know, you might be the kind of person who says, I couldn't meditate if my life depended on it. That's just not me. So what I'm going to do is also share some ideas and some techniques that will help those of you who find that quiet reflection challenging in order to help you do that. But the reflection itself, the analysis of what it is you're looking to do, how you're connecting with others and what your purpose is really important to a shift in mindset. So for those of you for whom that was an excruciating 2 minutes, I'm sorry, I won't do that to you again, but there was a purpose. So let's move on now to what it is we're looking at. I've come back to this slide that Anu started with this evolution of the lawyer capabilities. What we're going to focus on in the next couple of minutes is this section here around personal attributes, mindsets and behaviours. How is it in this particular part of this change in a lawyer attribute, and I'm using the term lawyer very broadly here, so those who provide legally related services, that kind of thing, this is where we're sitting. How is it that you're going to really focus in on those mindsets and really create that capability that's going to help you to succeed? The first thing I really want to just comment on is none of this is chiseled in stone. You know, there was a time where we could just tick off everything we did and say, great, that means I'm successful. The one thing that's become more and more apparent, particularly over the last 6 to 12 months, is we can't do that anymore. Our capabilities have to constantly evolve, but what is it that allows us to do that? So I'm going to go through 3 things with you, not in a lot of detail, but hopefully just enough to whet your appetite to see how you might use some of these techniques in order to continue to build these O-shaped capabilities. So the toolkit that we're going to slowly fill today is speaking a little bit about strengths, as Anu mentioned. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the value of coaching. I'm not going to go into coaching in a lot of detail, but I'm going to give you one particular technique that I really like and think helps with this reflection piece if you're not someone who reflects easily. And then the third thing is just a little bit around some empathy exercises that you might actually find useful. So very practical, I hope, and very easy for you to start to implement without a lot of stress. So the first thing is focusing on strengths. I'm a huge believer in the value and power of playing to your strengths and developing your strengths. I could go on for an incredibly long time about this, but that's not the purpose of this particular session. However, if you are really aware of your strengths and how to use them, you're going to be able to use them in a way that's going to give you that impetus to stretch your mindset, to transform, to do those new things and to engage with change. So what are your strengths and why is it important to know them? Let me give you a sporting example. It's one that I think works really well, and it's particularly apt at the moment, given that the Australian Open is just about starting in Melbourne. Take somebody like Rafael Nadal, who is a brilliant tennis player, brilliant. Rafael Nadal's particular strength is his forehand. His whole game is brilliant, but his forehand is something else. Do you think for one moment his coach would say to him, you know what, don't actually practice your forehand, that's already fine. All we're going to do is practice the things you're not so good at. Of course not. No coach is going to say that. What they're going to say is, we need to make sure that your all-round game is at a level that's not going to cause you issues. But what we're really going to focus on is that strength that is going to be the thing that will win championships for you. We're really going to take that strength and develop it and hone it. So that's what I'm talking about here. Not that you pretend that you're good at everything, but that you make sure that the things you are incredibly talented at, you develop and you invest in so that they become absolute strengths for you. What do I mean by that, and how do I know what my strengths are? There are any number of tools available for you that you could actually do to determine your strengths. I'm a huge fan of the Clifton Strengths tool. There's the BIA Strengths tool, but there's a number of them. It doesn't really matter which one you use if you use one. But there's just some basic questions that you can ask yourself or ask others that can help you unpack what your strengths are. So, for example, if I was to ask your best friend, what is it about you that's wonderful? What would they tell me? If you think about particularly the last 12 months and how challenging they've been, what is it that you've done that you're most proud of? But even more importantly, what was it specifically about you that meant you could achieve that nobody else could have done? It was what you brought. What is it that about you that your family or others value? And really importantly, when you do something that feels easy and smooth, what is that? What is it about that? Those are your strengths. Why are we focusing on that? This is the Clifton Strengths definitions. As I said, I really like these, but I think they give you an idea of what we're talking about here. What they say is a talent, an innate talent, is just a naturally recurring pattern of thought or feeling or behaviour that you can apply in a productive way. So as Anu was saying, for example, about music, my feeling is that I can learn to play. The behaviour is that I will practice. I can apply that productively. My strength comes if I have gotten to a place where I can produce an outcome that's a near perfect performance. I've taken my musical talent, I've invested in it, I've honed it, and I've made it a strength. And it's that reaching for strength that's really important. The other thing I've just popped on this slide, and I'm not going to go into it in a lot of detail, but Clifton Strengths talks about domains of strengths or areas where you are particularly talented. And the main reason I popped this up here is that this is where, in that strategic thinking area, often the people who love to reflect, the ones who really like to get in and mull things over, that's a core strength of theirs. It's one of my areas that I really like. For others, they want to get in and do, or they want to build relationships. That's their area of strength. So that's the sort of thing I'm talking about when I say, let's look at strengths. Using your strengths, using that ability to shift mindset, play to your strengths, use what's useful for you. And there's a little bit of a formula that the Clifton Strengths organisation uses, which I think works really nicely. So that natural talent multiplied by this investment around capability, the time that you're going to spend practicing developing your skills, that is what transfers to strength. And that investment and capability section is where that mindset shift starts to occur. That's strengths. The second thing that I said I would quickly touch on is the value of coaching. Again, there's an enormous number of models. There's so many different ways in which you can approach coaching. This particular model that I'm going to share with you incredibly quickly is a strengths-based model again. What I would encourage you to do is to work with a coach. If you can work with somebody who's going to help you to develop and shift your mindset, that's wonderful. But if you don't have a coach, one of the things I particularly like about this model, which is based on one that was developed by Executive Central, who are a fantastic group of coaches, this is one that you can actually do yourself and help you shift mindset. And it's called the Happy, Sad, Happy model. So essentially what it says is we start with the status quo, quite happy with everything, you're performing well, things are going well, you know you're capable of more, there's a niggle there that you know you want to change, but basically you're very happy. How are you going to shift from this sense of status quo, from this fixed position, to this new position that requires a change in mindset? What you need to do is create a bit of a sense of dissatisfaction. So the status quo isn't as awesome as you think it is. So what is it that's going to just create that sense of dissatisfaction that's going to give you the impetus to change? So what is it that would be better if you did it slightly differently? How would your relationships with others be better? And get yourself into a position where you can no longer accept the status quo. You are sufficiently dissatisfied with it that you must change. This is not good enough anymore. I have to change. So then I think about, what can I do to fix this, to change this, to move to this new state where I'm really happy with things. And this change, this move, is that growth mindset, that into a transformational mindset that Anu was talking about. This is where you ask yourself the bucket questions to shift yourself along and bring yourself to this new position of delirious happiness because you have shifted out of that fixed mindset. So that's, again, very, very quick touch on coaching. And the final thing that I wanted to touch on very quickly for those who find that deep reflection excruciatingly difficult is just thinking about things where you might actively think about putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. So if I have an issue that I'm going to think about, what would my 15-year-old daughter say? What would a police officer say? How would a teacher approach this? So really just shifting those perspectives around to someone who might never have to think about this problem. What would they say? Now, the answer might not be the one you ultimately land with, but it'll shift your thinking and make you move to another place. Think about that kind of thing. So that's my very, very quick toolkit. As I said, real skim over the surface, but I'm going to hand back to Anu now to move on to some of our blocks to mindset.
Thank you so much, Jan. So I hope, I mean, what we've covered there, we would normally do in deep workshops that we would spend some time doing deep reflection, make it relevant to individual and team goals as an example. But what Jan has created there and done really well is cover this idea that in order to develop a more flexible transformational mindset, and remember, we want to do that at an unconscious level, we need to do conscious work that is centered around relevance and desire. And the best way we can do that is to focus on our strengths and use our strengths to shift mindset and use our strengths to do deep reflection. And if we don't enjoy deep reflection, or it's not one of our strengths, how can we create different perceptions and predictions for the brain so that we can, again, expand the coding and expand the way we think? So what I want to touch on before we come to a conclusion is this idea that we hopefully have equipped you with some information and knowledge around how to both understand your mindset, why mindset awareness and development is important, and ways in which you can create a transformational mindset and also hack your mindset in the moment to think differently and embrace change. But one thing that I've found in my coaching experience is that the first few sessions, 2 or 3, go really well, and people start to do the work, and they might even see small incremental change. But one of the biggest things we find, usually around the 3 to 4 months of coaching in this space, is that people come and find that they have a number of blocks. So they'll come back to me and say, I'm finding this difficult, or this doesn't work, or actually this works better for me, or I'm going to go back to the way I was doing things previously. And so what I developed off the back of this is the idea that we create these blocks, and what are they? What is preventing, and how can we move past them? So the first one is that we have a lack of desire to change, okay? So I'm not sure if anyone has seen this. It's quite common, this intuitive mind trick. If you want to pop in the chat whether you have seen this before, maybe Jan, you can take us through it.
Okay. So the question here is, which is the larger of the two tables? And I'm just seeing if anyone. Oh, we're getting some people having it. Okay, so when you look at it like this, you have views about the perspective and the shape of those tables. What I'm going to do is show you the answer. It's nice when you go straight to the answer. And the answer is they are exactly the same size. And it's all about the angle from which you're viewing them. So it's about that, your mind playing that trick, distorting the perspective and making you think that something is quite different from what it actually is.
Yeah. So this is the first lesson, is that our instincts are often wrong, and they're put there for a reason to keep things simple for us. Some of you may say it doesn't matter. Some of them may say, I still can't see that. The critical thing is what we know we need to do and what we do to improve things are two things. So knowing is not enough. Telling you that you need to be aware of your mindset and developing is not enough. You need to do the work. And you need to have a little bit of faith that even if your instincts tell you that it's not going to help, that the proven research, science and experts say it does, and give it a go. It's a bit like trying to train your body for a marathon. Imagine someone saying to you, you don't need to run certain distances, you don't need to practice running, or my body can't change if I put the effort in. We seem to think it works in terms of our body, but when it comes to our mind, we're pretty skeptical, or we have our mind play tricks on us so we don't actually do the work. So the first one is our instincts can be wrong. Have a bit of faith, keep going, keep trying, because desire is so important to build mindset. And if you don't continue and have that desire, your mind will get blocked in terms of change. The next one is my favorite, learned helplessness. And I think having done positive psychology, it sort of brought things to light for me. And this is one, I know Jan's going to share a story too, but one that's close to my heart. And it's this idea that we can learn helplessness. So Martin Seligman, who's the king of positive psychology, has done a lot of work in this space. And he did an experiment with rats, a highly unethical one, but he did one where he put rats in a small pen. And if they tried to leave the pen, he would zap them and with an electric shock. And obviously what that would do, which I'm sure it will for humans as well, would stop them from wanting to leave the pen. What he found, however, was that when he switched off the zapper and rats would accidentally go close to it and realize they're not going to get zapped, they still didn't try and leave the pen. And what he developed was this idea that we create a helplessness. So if we try something a few times and it doesn't quite work for us, we get comfort from the fact that we would rather avoid risk and stay away from it than push and challenge our comfort zone. And it's actually quite easy to learn this helplessness, and we do it quickly. If we go back to the brain structure, it's because it keeps us safe and it keeps it nice and simple. You know, why would I want to leave my comfort zone or the pen that may or may not zap me when I'm actually pretty comfortable doing what I've always done? So Jan, I don't know if you want to share your experience with learned helplessness.
So my example is the reason why there's a spreadsheet on the slide, and it's that I decided very early in the piece that I was hopeless at Excel. I don't know how to write a formula, I don't understand how pivot tables work, and I don't want to because it's all too hard. And so for a long time, I just decided that if anything required a spreadsheet, I was not the person in the team to come to for that spreadsheet, despite the fact that I know that Excel is an awesome tool and I should know how to use it.
Absolutely. So this idea that we can actually build in a mechanism if we try to do this mindset work is really important for you to understand. Okay, one very last thing for you to do. I know we're coming towards the end of the session, but I just want you to have a very quick look at that, and in the chat, pop your answer.
Oh, look, we've got a great group here.
Technical points. We've got a mix.
We have.
Okay, I'm going to make this point. Assume the black belted person is better. Okay, so we've got a mixed bag of responses here. We do have the correct answer from a few people, which is they are female, they're not male. And you know, it'd be interesting if we had more time to talk to those who said female. Did you think about anything first? Did anything pop up for you first before you came to the conclusion of female? Perception, the black belt will win. Okay, so we're getting an array of different answers, but the answer is that they're both female. And what this is supposed to demonstrate, and again, we would need to delve a bit more into those that said female first, is that we have innate biases. And we have biases which help us make assumptions and also help us play to our strengths. So biases can help us in some respects, but they can hinder us in other ways as well. And so it's important to realize that not only do we have instincts which go against change, we learn helplessness which goes against change. We also create biases or have biases or bring them to the surface to help us prevent change. And if we think about why we do this, it goes against our survival mechanism. We want to stay safe. We like being in our comfort zone. We find reasons to stay in our comfort zone. We don't like to move. Our instincts will support that. And so actually any work we do on mindset development has to feel uncomfortable. Yes, we can use our strengths to do some activities to support us, but it has to feel different and perhaps not as comfortable as we'd like it to. And I've put this quote in because it's probably the most commonly quoted bias when I'm coaching people, which is, it's not me, it's them. Okay, so the idea that if we want to change, then yes, I'm not the problem, it's everybody else that needs to change. And if we just think about that if we take full accountability and responsibility to change our mindset, realize it takes work, realize that we don't get a transformational mindset overnight. I had a client say to me, I love the idea of that mindset and it would really help me in my new world. I'm trying to navigate new client expectations. How do I get one? Just give me a kind of shortcut. And I said, how long did it take you to become a successful practitioner? That's how long it's going to take you to develop this unconscious transformational mindset. But the good news is you can absolutely do things like in-time hacks and reflection exercises, which will help you shift that spectrum away from a fixed mindset and towards a transformational. And there are aspects of your fixed mindset that we want to keep, but there are also aspects that we need to develop. And so I wanted to just show you a couple of those blocks, because what we're hoping is that you'll go away and try some of these things and realize that you're going to confront a number of these blocks as you go. And the last one I want to talk to you before I'm going to hand to Jan is one of the biggest blocks is this idea that our minds need to remain safe. So simplicity is one thing. Safety is another. It's a much stronger block to mindset development. So the best way to manage this is to look at my little scale there. Okay, we want to be challenged, but we don't want to feel unsafe. We don't want to feel threatened. So we need to create acceptance and certainty and predictability. And a lot of that is working to your strengths, because that's going to make you feel comfortable. So if you're not someone that wants to do an hour of reflection a day and journal, then how can you reflect and work towards your strengths to do that activity and develop your mindset, but not be so far the other way that it makes you feel uncomfortable? Or how can you move towards the meeting with that particular client and having that conversation and shifting your mindset without feeling completely out of your depth? And we do that by making things relevant, creating new data, practicing in safe situations, and creating perspectives and looking at things from other people's points of view so we can get our own perspective on the situation or change our own perspective on the situation. So a great question I've highlighted for people as a starting point here is when we feel ourselves getting the physical symptoms of feeling unsafe. The first question we want to do is to hack. How do I feel? What does this mean? And what do I need to change now to move forward? And that in the moment will hopefully allow us to balance our scales on mindset balance and continue to build this transformational mindset. Obviously, over time, we need to tap into our feelings on a deeper level and set some goals so we can change moving forward on a consistent basis. But in the moment, this is how to hijack that safe mindset, wanting to override the flexible and to allow us to keep moving forward. So summary slide for those for the session that we've done today, and then I'll hand to Jan to close. 3 steps to take away. I love 2 or 3 takeaways. The first one is that knowing that mindset development is important is not enough. You're not going to leave here and suddenly have a transformational mindset, or if you have one, you're not going to necessarily maintain it. The second one is that we have a number of blocks based on simplicity and safety that will prevent us progressing. We need to consciously choose and accept to move past them. And we do that by using language that can ground us, engage our prefrontal cortex, and then over time we build new brain coding that influences a different type of mindset. And the third one is that we build our mindset in the moment and into the future by interacting with our conscious mind and coding new options on our map. It's not enough just to in-time hack. We have to do the deep work. And as Jan says, we can do that work in a way that is meaningful and authentic for us.
Okay. We liked the irony of me wrapping up with another formula given my confession about Excel spreadsheets. But essentially what we've said is that in order to obtain this sort of transformation with a fixed mindset, you can change, you can develop to a certain extent. Applying a growth mindset is going to mean that development, that transformation is exponentially better. And transformation with a transformational mindset is infinite in its possibility. But as Anu just said, a 1-hour workshop is not going to give you a transformational mindset, but working on that on a daily basis is going to help you to achieve that kind of change. So there's our other formula. Now, I know we are pushing right up against the end of our time, but I know there were a couple of questions. I think there were a couple of questions there. So I don't have anything.
Hi, Jan. There was a question, but it was placed very early in the presentation and it was pretty much answered as you went through. So
beautiful.
It was, thank you. That question
I was conscious that there was one sitting there that we were coming back to. So thank you.
Yeah, that's okay. But if anyone does have any questions, please just pop them into the Q&A.
What a lovely little ending there, Fiona.
Sorry about that. Just pop them into the Q&A or in the chat. We've only got a few minutes, but we'd really like to answer some questions if we can and take this opportunity while we have the time. I think, Jan, there's one that's popped up.
I can see. There we go. Would you feel everything has an extreme that needs to be avoided? Absolutely. And one of the things that is really important when you're doing any work around strengths is that you can, of course, overplay your strengths. You know, one of the things that can happen is you're so good at something, you're so into it that you can actually push it too hard and too far. I'm someone who is very disciplined. I like to organise things. I was very conscious around this time last week when I realised how much we had on that I was trying to organise the living bejesus out of everybody, which was not an appropriate way for me to play to my strengths. So yes, you can absolutely go too far with things and turn it into something that's a challenge. We have a question. Our top tip for encouraging creativity, please. I suspect my answer and Anu's would be slightly different. Mine is very much about going into that reflective space, and that I love journaling and that kind of thing. But Anu, what would you say?
So it depends on the person, so I'd need to understand them a bit more. I think it's the reflection's a big part of it, but the relevance of that reflection is important, and that's why I created the buckets, because just ad hoc reflection's not enough. It's got to be specific in terms of something you may want to achieve or something you're looking to develop. So yeah, I think it really depends on the person, but I'd say reflection too.
Okay. And we have a question about matching strengths to organisational needs. That is an enormous question. What is the challenge there is building a culture that is based on strengths and that embraces strengths. And often that's something organisations think they do, but it's really quite an operational approach to the way in which things are done. Enormous amount of scope for discussion there, but it's very much about building a strengths-based culture across an organisation in order to ensure that strengths is what motivates and gives the impetus to change. And I think have we got time for one last question? I think, Fiona.
Yeah, that's fine.
Some people are asking for potential books and things. We can provide some information on that for Terry and Fiona to share. And the final question, I think, is the last one. How do you get introverted people to change their mindset without them feeling like they're under attack? I love this question because if we want to go to tools and MBTI, I test as a very strong introvert. It's not actually about getting an introverted person to change. It's about allowing people to tap into their particular strengths and using that strength in a way that allows them to share, to create, to build capability in their own unique and authentic way. It's very easy in an environment like ours for the loudest people to be heard, and it's around making sure that space is provided for people to stop and think, for people to share in a different way, whether that's in writing or whatever it might be. But I think just going loud and soft or introverted, extroverted doesn't necessarily understand the way in which people can play to their strength.
I'll just add quickly because I know we've got to go, but your introversion or extroversion is a personality trait. So we talk about that part, the yellow part of your brain, which is different to mindset and different. And so you can, as Jan said, you can use your introversion to your strength to develop a transformational mindset. It's just the way in which you do it. But the base level awareness is the really important part, because like Jan spoke about, we don't want to overplay or be extreme, because what happens when we do that, we tip into the reptilian structure of our brain where all of that goes to the other end of the spectrum, and it's all about survival. So we've got to find that balance between pushing ourselves, challenging ourselves, changing our mindset, but doing it in an authentic way for us.
Great, thank you. And I think we've run out of time now, so we'll just wrap up the session. So thank you, Jan and Anu. We hope everyone's enjoyed this session. And just a reminder that the session will be available as part of the on-demand program for this event. And it will also be available as a video, and in most cases also as a podcast on the CLI and APMA websites after the event is finished. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you, Jan and Anu, for your time again. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.